Welcome to the Peak Performance Productivity Podcast, revealing what productive peak performers think, say and do, so you too can be productive. With me, your host, Michael Tipper. So my guest today got into sales after a short career in the Metropolitan Police Force. He made his first sale in the first week, but it then took him another 26 weeks before he made his next sale. On the brink of leaving the profession, he was given a book that gave him a secret to success and inspired him to up his game. In quick succession, he then became his team's top sales performer, the regional top performer, and then European top performer and award winner. His sales career accelerated, rapidly becoming a team leader, sales manager, and then the sales and marketing director of a FTSE 250 company. On the back of that success, he then turned his hand to helping others achieve peak performance. Described by the brilliant Brian Tracy as one of the top motivational coaches in the UK, he's personally worked with over 250,000 people, delivering over 2,000 paid presentations around the world. His I Am 10 methodology has helped thousands of professionals become peak performers, and today he shares his insights through the I Am 10 show and the Director's Compass, which is an initiative to support leaders of businesses make smart decisions, employ winning strategies and get better results. All this from a man who was told as a teenager he was best suited to being a forklift truck driver. Today, when he's not helping business leaders or inspiring others to peak performance, you'll find him either with his kids, halfway up a tree, or eating ice cream. So it's my pleasure to welcome Gavin Ingham to the show. Gavin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. Nice to be here.
So the first question I've got for you is, I am really curious to understand what kept you going during those 26 weeks after your first success in sales and then not having anything for 6 months?
No options, I think, really, Michael, at that point in time. I'd left my career in the Metropolitan Police, and I hadn't chosen a career in sales. I'd just kind of fallen into it, as many people do. In fact, when I was told forklift truck driver or salesperson would be were the right answers off the psychometric test, I was tempted by forklift truck driver before I took salesperson. And yeah, really, Michael, I don't know what I would have done if not. So I was kind of right out of options.
Did you find yourself wanting to give up during that time?
Sure, and I think in some ways I probably did in moments. I certainly had days when I got home and I thought this just isn't working out. And if there'd been somewhere I could have run to, I probably would have done. But I was in London. I had a mortgage. I needed to pay it. I had no choice. I had to put food on the table, so I had to keep trying.
And what was the lowest point in that 6 months?
That's a good question. I remember one day I had been working with a client who, well, not a client, a prospect who I brought on board, and I thought this was going to be the person that I would do a deal with. And I was actually in recruitment, and I'd had 2 or 3 people down on interview. I thought I'd done everything I should have done. I thought the candidates were perfect. I didn't think he had any other options other than using me, or he wasn't looking at any other options. And on this particular day, he told me that he had hired somebody from someone else that I didn't even know he was working with. And well, you can imagine the thoughts that went through my head, and they weren't pretty. And I just literally wasted probably best part of 5 days on that. And I went home and I just sat there and I literally cried. It's the only time I actually remember crying in my adult life. And I just sat there and cried. And just thought, what am I going to do now? That's just awful.
As you reflect back on that persistence that you had to keep going for 6 months, what traits do you identify in yourself that now that you see in peak performers? Because peak performance doesn't happen overnight. It's one of those things that builds up over time and you have to persist through. So what traits do you see that you had back then that you've seen in other peak performers as you've done your work?
Well, I think and there's a really interesting line of questioning this that nobody else has ever gone down. I've been asked about all of these things, but not quite in this order. So it's brought out already very different answers than I've given elsewhere, because I never see that 26 weeks as particularly being peak performance. I see it as part of the journey to getting focused on peak performance. But in my own head, I see that in some ways as a failure, as in, why couldn't I have made the learnings that I needed to make earlier on and got focused earlier on? But I think the answer is I had a reason. So I was not prepared to pack my bags and go home back up north to my mum's house. I was not prepared to sell my house and move into, you know, some digs with somebody else. I bought my flat when I was in the police, and I was determined to hang on to it, and I was determined to pay my own way in life. Even when it wasn't looking like it was working, I kept reminding myself, well, you have no choice. So when you look at motivation, it was very much away from motivation with me. It was, I'm not going to be beaten by this. I'm going to keep going. But I certainly think during that time, I lost faith in the fact that I would succeed. And I think it's later on when I started to re-engineer things and I realized how to get through situations like that in a much more elegant way. But when you go, what was that driver? I think it was an away from driver, is I'm not just going to give up and go home. I think it was that more than anything.
Do you think that's that would have been a stronger, is that a stronger driver for you than, say, having the sales, the rewards of the sales that came later on? Do you think that is a stronger driver for you?
No. No, no, I don't. It was a driver because I felt I had no choice, and you know, it's interesting because I would put a lot of that back down to upbringing. So I think a lot of my upbringing was, you know, you do what is necessary, and you make sure that you do what you've got to do. So you carry on working irrespective. I'm not one of these people who just go, well, that's it, it's not working, and walk away. So I just was carrying on. But I think the problem at that point was that probably I had a lot of the mental traits, and I was positive most days, I think, even though it took me down sometimes. I think I was positive most days. I think what I didn't have was the right strategies. So I think I didn't have the sales strategies, that's for sure. But I think I also, some of that positivity, even though I was keeping going, I didn't have that little edge that allowed me to have that edge in sales calls, that allowed me to have that edge when I was closing down a deal. And I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, one of the things that I think people start to do when your mindset's not quite right, that impacts your behavior. So you might have a certain conversation, but you don't have the difficult bit. And in a sales conversation, often that's just that one extra question. So that one extra question around that 5-day deal, which I didn't ask, because in my head I was going, okay, he's working with me. I feel good about that. We've got the relationship. I don't want to spoil that relationship by asking. I'm pretty sure he's not working with anybody else. And so I had the conversation with myself about asking that question, and I kicked myself afterwards for not asking that question. But at the time, my mental state was just not such that I was going to ask that question for fear of upsetting him. And whereas now I would always ask the difficult questions, because they're the ones that make the difference, I think, in sales, in consulting, and as I've seen with you when you're working with people in coaching. It's that one extra question, isn't it, that comes from that really productive, positive mindset that gets that real learning point.
It reminds me of a great analogy about water boils. Water's really hot up until 99.9, and then it turns into steam because of that one last change of that small little step. What was the environment like that you were working in? So you were there for 6 months. You produced in the first week. They thought you were a superstar. Then all of a sudden you aren't a provider of revenue for 6 months. But the environment must have supported you in some way. How did they work with you at that time?
Well, yeah. Yes and no. So, I mean,
I was assuming that they did. So maybe I should ask, what was the environment like?
So the environment was incredibly positive, and there were lots of people succeeding and lots of people banging away on the phones and doing all the good stuff that they needed to do to get the success. So you're sitting in an environment of success. So that bit of it is positive. Was there any support? Not so much. I think back in the day, you much more, particularly in a sales role, were tending to be lobbed in and told, there's a phone, there's a phone book, get on with it. Or there's a phone, there's some data, or go and get your own data, get on with it. So not so much really, which I think, if I'm allowed to steal the next step, you can take me back if you want, but I think leads me to the aha awakening moment of when a colleague gave me a book when I was right on the point of exiting. And it was a book by Anthony Robbins. And I've said this so many times, I can't remember what was in that book really, but I do remember one thing, and I don't even know if he said it specifically or if it just came kind of by osmosis out of the book to me, but it was, you're responsible. And I realized that despite the fact that I was there, and despite that I was present, and despite the fact that I was taking responsibility for being there and being present, I wasn't taking responsibility for my results and my results causing the action. And I think it's that, like, you know, kind of above the line, below the line thing where I'd spend a lot of the time moaning about the database, or moaning about the processes, or moaning about the lack of training, or moaning about the management, or moaning about anything that wasn't anything that I had control of. And it was that kind of, well, actually, I do have control. I have control over who I pick as my clients or my prospects, who I ring. I have control over the call, not to their, I can't guarantee they do what I want, but I can certainly improve my sales skills. And I think when I sat there, I thought, well, I haven't done enough to improve my sales skills. I haven't done enough to think about what works and doesn't work, etc. And it was that one little thing, you're responsible. And then I kind of went, what for? And how would I do that? And it moved me effectively from below the line to above the line. And that really made the biggest difference for me, I think, of anything, probably at any point in my career.
You describe the work you do as being based on your search for identifying the differentiation between mediocre, good, average performers to those who operate at the top level. Did your journey start at that point, or had it started earlier?
It's a funny story. I've always been intrigued by mindset and stuff, and I read books and things prior to that. But just lightly, they never really, I enjoyed them, but they never really resonated. It was almost like I read them in isolation from myself. But there were a few strange little events in my life. So if I take you right the way back to about 1981 or something like that, I was an appalling sports person. And I remember in January, we ran the school cross-country race, and we were year 3 and year 4. And I was year 4. So I was the oldest year group of, say, 240 children. And I was girls and boys. So I'm a boy. And I'm sorry if that upsets anybody, but boys are faster runners than girls. I'm a boy on average. I'm a boy, and I'm the older year group. And we do this cross-country thing. And I remember running along the top road, which is about halfway round, at the back last, bar a couple of people, looking down across the moor to the field at the bottom when somebody won it. And I remember coming in and virtually asthmatic and on the floor, just feeling like this is really not my thing. And then in June, we're doing some sprint stuff. Now, you might say sprint different, but I'd never been a sprinter either. And we do this sprint thing in a PE lesson, and I beat this chap called John. And John was not only the best runner in school, but also the best runner in Bradford, possibly the best runner in West Yorkshire. And I beat him over 100 metres. And he was a really nice bloke, actually. And we were in the same schoolhouse, which I think helped. And he took me to the PE teacher and he said, Gavin's just beaten me. He should be in the sports day running for our house. And the teacher went, yeah, right. Just like not happening. And John was pretty persistent. And I was going, look, forget it, I'll go. And John was like, no, listen, he's just beaten me. He's got to get a race. He's got to be in something. So the teacher obviously looked at this thing and kind of went, well, nobody wants to do the 800 meters. And he gave me the 800 meters, which again was, much, much, much further. And I couldn't run 300 meters back in January. And I won it. And from there on in, I was one of the top, I won Bradford schools, I won West Yorkshire schools, and I was a good runner. And now you could say, well, you'd made some physical changes, but you don't make that many physical changes in, 5 months. And it was just a mental thing. And I don't know what it was, but it had always intrigued me that I knew kind of in the back of my head, that's mental, what was going on there. And that was my first kind of real... yeah, you know what? There's something in mindset affecting behaviour here.
Now, I'd like to take a huge leap forward to where you are today, which is about your IM10 philosophy and your conviction, clarity and consistency, those themes that run through everything that you do. And now you're there, can you go back in time and explain how those have evolved through your life's journey to where they became part of the work that you do?
Yeah, of course. So... I think after I read the Anthony Robbins book and realized the responsibility thing, I actually turned it around quite quickly, really quite quickly. And so that encouraged me to do some more study. And at first I started reading personal development books, so books by Brian Tracy or Zig Ziglar or Jim Rohn or whatever. But quite quickly, they started to feel a little bit samey. And that's not to say you can't learn things off a lot of those books, but I kind of went, I've got to go deeper here. So I asked myself, well, who did I like best? And I liked all of them, but I kind of went, well, Robbins is responsible for this big turnaround in me. So I bought his Power Talk, and I did that, which was a series of 24 audios. And I enjoyed that, started to get some stuff out of that, and then thought, okay, well, where did his stuff come from? And that brought me to NLP. So I then became an NLP practitioner, master practitioner, etc. And then I moved into doing some sort of sales skills stuff and learning sales skills, and I learned different processes and things like that. As I went through that, I started really then narrowing down, because I went, well, I've got this huge amount of content and this huge amount of stuff, but what's really made the difference for me, and what's really made the difference for other people? And I started to get those thoughts in my head, and then I started taking on other people working for me. And at that point, you know, you want them to do the work, but you also want them to be doing it in the right way and getting the results. So I had to do some training, but I didn't want to do too much training, because I think one of the things you recognize is people tend to only do little bits. So you've got to work out what are those little bits that make the most difference. And that was when I started to really formulate the stuff around mindset, pulling from all of those little areas and bringing my own stories in and everything. And then when I was back in, I think, 2001, I was reading the paper, and there was a job came up, and I thought I fancy that job, which was in this industry, and I moved into this industry. And that was when I really started to put things together in earnest and started thinking about what really, really makes the difference. So, I mean, lots and lots of people use a scale of 1 to 10 for measuring all sorts of things. It's obviously naturally very, very common thing to do. I think even Robbins did. But I think one of the things I realized that it was when people made quantum shifts that they really got results. So I'd be teaching cold callers, and yes, the ability to open a conversation, or the ability to objection handle, or the ability to close were really, really important. But actually you could have all of those things and still not succeed. Whereas somebody could change their mind from I can't to I can, and even without those, they'd still get some pretty good results. So it was almost like you made this quantum leap as an individual, and then you underpinned it with a set of skills to hold it up there. And that was when I really sort of came down and had this idea of I am 10. And the funny thing with I am 10 is I'd been teaching it for about 4 years. And everybody, whenever I went back to anybody, they kept, what was great? Oh, we love that. The I am 10 guy, the I am 10 thing, the I am 10, the I am 10, the I am 10. But it wasn't what I was calling it. It was just one little lesson in a whole load of lessons that I was teaching. And I guess life has this habit of teaching you what you most need to know, but we tend to ignore it every day. And I suddenly, somebody said something to me, and I just thought, yeah, why is that not the main message? Why is the main message not about I am 10, being a 10, and people asking themselves the question, how can I be a 10 today? And it was when I made that connection that it really started to come together as a brand.
Can you just give a few words to describe what a 1 looks like compared to what a 10 looks like in the sales context?
Yeah, of course. So 1 would be negative, lack of belief, doesn't care, not interested, going through the motions. Actually, probably not even going through the motions, probably doing nothing. A 1. A 10, on the other hand, and again, it depends completely where in the sales process they are. So I mean, very generic. But people, if you ask them the question, say, well, it's motivated, confident, determined, enthusiastic, resilient, tenacious, persistent, all in different places, because somewhere else it might be empathetic and understanding,
So I've heard you describe, you talk about the blend between attitude and skills. There's like an 80% attitude and 20% skills. And you say that the attitude enables you to access your skills more effectively. Why do you think that is?
Well, first off, I didn't say it was 80-20. I asked lots of people, and they told me on average it was 80-20. Because I always joke and say, I don't know. I've only asked 250,000 people. And I think it does depend on the role, the position, the situation. I've had very few people say less than 50. and there does seem to be a split between more technical people, more process driven people. If you move people away from dealing with people, they tend to go more 50-50, 60-40, whereas sales, they tend to start going 80-20, 90-10. And actually, even in sales, the more customer facing, the more new business, the more attitudinal they tend to be. The answer is quite simple. Your attitude is your ability to access your skills. So if you're not in the right mindset, you're either not going to access the skill at all. So think about it this way. You're a leader and you have decided that an important task you've got to do is have a conversation with a member of staff, but every other conversation you've ever had with that member of your team has gone badly, and your memory says to you, this is going to be a nightmare. And so your emotion around doing that is really negative. You maybe feel frustrated, maybe you feel just you can't be bothered, maybe you feel angry. I mean, I don't know what you feel, but negative thoughts. Chances are you might not do it at all. So you might just put it off. So that's your attitude affecting your behavior. But then maybe you decide, right, I'm gonna do this, and you do it. But like even in the first second, they say something, and rather than just treating it as something that they say, you read a whole load of stuff into it, and it impacts your behavior, and then it all spirals out of control after that. So just two really, really simple examples of how it affects your behavior. And as to why, the answer is because how you feel obviously determines how you act. You know, it's going to affect just simple behaviors like the speed you speak, the question. I mean, interesting one, presenting, which we both do a lot. Why do bad presenters make such a hash of it? And one of the answers is because they know what they're supposed to do. When you ask presenters, tell me all the really bad things that presenters do, and they'll say, not looking at the audience, not talking to the audience, stuck in PowerPoint, looking at the PowerPoint, and then they all stand up and do it. And you're like, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And what's going on here is they're scared witless. And if they're scared witless, then they naturally turn away from the audience. Now, the irony is that makes it a damn sight harder for them, because the best thing you can do is engage the audience, but you've kind of got to be in the right mindset to be able to do that, or you
yeah.
So it becomes kind of self-fulfilling, you know, because the attitude drives the behavior, drives the result, and then that makes you feel worse.
How do you link into the conviction, clarity, and consistency? Where does that fit in with the IM10?
Yeah, of course. So being a 10 is about being in the best state you can be for that moment, the most resourceful state, a winning state, depends how you want to call it. So, you know, you need to think about those critical moments in your life where being a 10 is important, whether that's a conversation with your spouse or spending time with your children, or that sales conversation, or that leadership presentation, or, you know, whatever it is. Having done that, you've got to decide what are those winning attitudes. So, you know, you and me have had conversations about behaviors many, many times. And likewise, you've got to identify those mindsets just as specifically. Having done that and recognizing what a 10 is, you've then got to go, well, how do you get there? And that's the question. Now, people can come up with lots and lots of questions, but I believe there are 3 core building blocks to delivering on that promise of being a 10, whatever the situation is. And I believe that they are conviction, which is the mindset; clarity, which is what you do and what you don't do, when you do it and when you don't do it; and then probably your favorite one, consistency, which is turning up and delivering over and over and over again. And, you know, I actually think consistency is well looked at, both positively and negatively, because positively, high performance is doing the right things regularly. And the enemy of high performance is chronic inconsistency.
What do you think stops people from becoming peak performers, becoming high performers? Because there are thousands of books written about the topic. You can do a Google search and find all the information necessary for someone to take the steps, or what steps to take to become good at just about anything. But many don't. Now, assuming that it's not out of ignorance because they don't know it's possible, but assuming they do know, what is it that stops people from making those steps?
There's many things, aren't there? How many am I allowed?
Top 3. Based on your experience, I know you've worked one-on-one with a lot of people, and you've coached a lot of people, and I'm sure amongst some of those there has been some resistance somewhere. So what would you say are the top 3 things, and what have you advised them to do to overcome those?
I'm one of these people, you ask me that question today and you ask it tomorrow, I might give you 3 different answers depending on the context of what's gone on during the day. But today, and I don't think people are going to like the first answer at all, and I suspect this would be my first answer any day, and that comes down to, bottom line, they can't be bothered. it's the difference between need and want. They want it, but when you start looking at Anthony Robbins' stuff around pain and pleasure, there are too many secondary gains for not doing it. So people like the idea of being a high performer at work, but when they realize that that requires work, they like the or longer hours or study or whatever, all of a sudden the pub looks really attractive. And that sounds a little bit harsh, but that is the reality. People turn around and say, I have no time. And then they go back to work and talk about the box sets they've watched in the last week. And you're like, so you've spent 24 hours watching telly in the last week. So I think it comes down to, first off, they can't be bothered. And I think the second reason is that, and in essence, really, I mean, because this is why I asked the question, in essence, really, the answer to that question is in conviction, clarity, and consistency and all 10 steps, because you need all of this in play to make it work. But so not being bothered is one, which links to they just don't have a why. So, you know, one of the reasons I love the Director's Compass is that I've got people who know why they're there because they're paying for it themselves and they made the decision themselves. It's entirely different when you have a team of corporate people sitting in front of you who didn't choose to be there and don't necessarily want to be there. They don't have any why. So why are they going to turn their world upside down? And the answer is 80% of them won't unless you give them one. So that why is really important. Now, how you go about getting that and what else is getting in the way, and you're going to love the next word, I think it's a lack of a systemic approach to change. Do you like that, Michael?
I love that one. Well, you know very well that process and systems are words of arousal to me.
I genuinely think that's it. And the funny thing is, when you look at the journey, because of what I'm so, you know, most people who've experienced, you know, if you look at 80% of people who've experienced my work, they've experienced IM10 in the simplest format. So they've experienced, you know, what are the problems you have? What does the right attitude look like? Attitude affects behavior, affects results. You need to be inside out motivated, not outside in. They've experienced, you know, what a 10 is, what a 10's not. How do you go about being a 10? Half a dozen things, maybe a couple of pieces about conviction, clarity, and consistency, but no more. And the reality is, if you look at it this way, it's like us. Conviction is inside of us. So that's the 10, that's the mindset, that's everything. It's critically important because without that, nothing starts, right? So you can't start without that. Clarity is what you do, right? And what you don't do. So that's just as important, if not more important. But the irony is you can have clarity, but if you don't have belief and you don't have conviction, then the clarity doesn't work. So you just like, doesn't work. On the other hand, if you have conviction and not clarity, then you're a motivated idiot. So you kind of need both, right? So you've got this that's inside. Then you've got what you do here, what you're in control of, and then you've got consistency. And consistency is part of these two, and you're creating a system. But it's then also about, and you mentioned it earlier on, it's also about the environment. So, you know, a lot of people just don't have their environments set up for success. You know, I don't know whether he stole it. I think I've seen it somewhere else. But the last person I remember saying it was Colin Hiles. And our good friend Colin Hiles says, if you want to go on a diet, put your house on a diet. And what he's talking about there is the triggers in the environment. You know, you can have the conviction, you can have the clarity, but if you've got a chocolate biscuit in the cupboard calling for you, going, woo, chocolate biscuit, you're feeling hungry, your willpower can be amazing and you can turn it down all night. But then at 10:30, as you're going to bed, you just go, oh, just before I clean my teeth, boom, and you eat 3 chocolate biscuits. And if you'd not had them in, you wouldn't have done that. And actually, you wouldn't have required that willpower because it would actually be, oh, God, I'll have to drive to the garage. I'm not going to do that. So it's the combination of all three that works together that becomes critically important. And that's why you need a system, because in conviction is all the why and the mindset and the belief and all that stuff. And clarity is all about behaviors, and consistency is all about, all right, so how do you make this work? And funnily enough, you said early on, you're all about the difference between poor performers and top performers. And I was, but over the years, I've kind of gone like this, because actually the difference between poor performers and top performers is easy. They just don't do any of it. And when I ask the question, people, they go, oh, they're motivated. And I go, but no, but lots of people are motivated who don't get results. And they go, well, they do the right things. And I go, they know what to do. And I go, no, lots of people know what to do. And actually, I think the difference between that and that is actually consistency. And it's actually having that system that you do, consistency. So you can take lots of great salespeople or lots of great leaders who are just below that level, and they're kind of nearly there most of the time. They're just not there all of the time. And that's the bit, I think, that pushes you from there to there.
I think one of the most powerful things that you say a lot of powerful things. One of the things that resonated with me as we've worked together over the last sort of 6-7 months or so was the fact that by having a system, you take away the emotional element of any decision making. By working through a process, you're not left to the whim of your subconscious and your emotional brain that says, I don't want to do this.
So do you want me to tell you where that started?
We go on then.
There's two great historical points where I realized how powerful that was. So one was around running. And I read a book by Seb Coe, and Seb Coe talked about running on Christmas Day. And he said that Christmas Day was the only day where he ran and he thought maybe the others won't be running, because every other day he knew that they would be running. But Christmas Day, he just wondered whether he was just getting that 1/365th of an edge. And I thought, consistency. And back in the day then, people often say to me, oh, Gav, you were really good at running every day. And the irony was, it was in my system so much that both system and in my system that I would go running no matter what was happening. So, I would be away on a holiday with two mates and we'd arrive and they'd go, let's go for beer. And I'd go first night and I'd go, I'll meet at the pub in an hour. And I would go for a run. And it's like the decision to not go was harder than the decision to go. So that was my first system that worked really well. The second one, and I don't know if I've ever shared this story before, and I may never share it again because people are going to go, oh my God. As a police officer, you meet times when you really ought to hand out a ticket for driving offences. And most of the time as a police officer, I would let people off with a warning because that's what I felt was right. But there were times when people would do things that were just fundamentally ludicrous. So, for example, at Charing Cross Hospital, there was a left-hand turn over a no left-hand turn over a pedestrian crossing, and it was blind. And literally, people who were injured are crossing that to go to hospital, and people would do the no left because they couldn't be bothered. And you'd be walking down the road and you'd see somebody do a no left and you'd pull them over, and they would always have a good excuse, always. So if you listened to the excuse and judged on whether you were going to give them a ticket or not, you would never, ever give a ticket. So you had to have this pre-made decision. If anybody comes around that corner, they get a ticket. I'll be really nice about it. I'll explain to them why they're getting one, and it's unarguable, but they have to get one, because otherwise, when I'm walking down this road and somebody does that, I will never. And one day, somebody will come around that corner, knock somebody over, and at some level, I feel to blame. I handed out very few parking tickets and speeding tickets, well, not speeding tickets, traffic tickets, but there were one or two places where I was walking and I'd see these things and I go, but I had to have it pre-decided in my mind. And maybe other police officers weren't as soft as me and they would just hand them out anyway. But when I listened to your excuse, I would always, it would be, oh, well, I'm coming to see somebody in hospital and I'm really late and I got lost and I didn't know where. It all might be true, but you still might have knocked somebody over. And they were my first two kind of things of going, actually, to beat the environment not giving you what you want, the best thing you can have is a system.
Absolutely. I absolutely love systems.
But don't do any no lefts near me, Michael.
well, I was going to point out that when you said you do this, I say I wasn't there, just for the record, I wasn't there. One of the things you've also said, what I think is really powerful, is that peak performers don't let the environment affect their attitude. And so if some bad stuff does happen that might rock someone else and put them into an emotional bad state, peak performers don't let that happen. Now, that requires a huge emotional intelligence. How do you develop that ability to get to a 10 and stay at a 10 in spite of what's happening?
Yeah, so I mean a couple of things. The first one is around there's probably three, aren't there? So the first one is around awareness. You've got to give yourself permission to have that awareness, and I think that requires courage to face up. So I think it requires some humility, as in, you can't believe you're already right, and I think you need discipline to constantly look at it as well. So that's the first thing. I think the second piece is you need strategies for getting out of it. So you need strategies that work for you, and often they're very, very simple, but you need to have pre-decided what they were. And then the third thing, and I think probably this is the big one, you need some kind of accountability. So we all have days that go down the toilet. We all do. You do, I do, everybody does. And in some ways, And it matters if you do it every day. But in some ways, it doesn't really matter in what you do in that moment. Do you carry on and have a bad day, but try to do it? Do you give up and go to the pub? Do you go and eat a turkey, you know, a chicken burger or whatever? You know, it doesn't really matter what you do. What matters is that accountability. And there's many, I've seen many versions of how people do that. But I think going back and assessing that day, asking yourself what went well, what didn't go so well, what you would do differently, but then thinking about what would you change in the future? So does something need to change in your environment? Does something need to change in your system? Do you need to deal with it differently? Or do you just need to accept that was a one-off and move on? You know, so I think that assessment of the situation, otherwise we all do what we do, don't we? We keep on making the same mistakes. I mean, right now, I know a lot of people do this because I've talked to a lot of people about it. You know, they'll take a little break, they're sat at their computer, working at home, and they go on to wherever their favorite little thing of choice is, YouTube or, you know, or Facebook or even LinkedIn. I mean, some people, it's LinkedIn. They get lost on LinkedIn and they just go down the rabbit hole and they lose hours. And I think that's perfectly obvious why they do it. It's perfectly understandable. I think we all do it at some point or other. But if you don't assess it, you know, if you haven't got a set of criteria, and then if you don't assess that set of criteria, then you're never going to do anything about it. And I think, as I say, acknowledging what you've done well, learning what you need to learn, and then what you've got to change. And then perhaps the most important bit, move on. You know, you know, when I was working with sales teams, and I think with sales teams, it's so obvious, you know, they'd have incredibly bad days. And one of the things they've got to do, once they've gone, well, there was good stuff and I've learned this and this is what I'm going to change, they've then got to be able to just let it go. And actually, there was a great little question that I use in coaching and that I'm pretty sure came from NLP. And it was, it's just quite simply, what do you need to learn from this so that you can let it go now? And I just always thought that was such a clever little question. And that's one I ask myself. So, you know, what do I need to learn from this so I can let it go now? Or, and I have different versions of it. So what do I need to apply differently from this so that I can let it go now? So I have like different little versions that I ask myself depending on the situation. And before anybody thinks about me sitting there kind of assessing my performance on a daily basis for hours a day, I just have the conversation with myself in the shower. I mean, it literally is a 60-second, you know, check. But it's the importance of that check. So I have a check in the morning and in the evening. So in the morning, it's how can I be a 10 today? And then I think about 2 or 3 situations where I really need to perform and see myself doing that. And then in the evening, it's just to check back on, well, did I do that? And how did I perform? And what would I do differently? And what have you? And some people love writing all that stuff down. I like doing it in my head. But the bottom line is you need to make sure it happens either way.
Gavin, I could talk to you for hours about peak performance, and the reason why I wanted to bring you on the show is because I'm about peak performance productivity, because I think if you want to perform at a high level, you have to be productive, and those who do that are productive. And so everything you've talked about, the I am 10 philosophy, the taking responsibility, your whole philosophy around development and all the tips that you've given will really help people become more productive. The last question, or the penultimate question I have for you, is that as you reflect back on your own life and the work that you've done, in the context of productivity and getting more done out of the day, what would be the one thing that you would advise people to do, say, think, or believe that would help them become even more productive?
Well, so I think you answered the question in many ways. So one of my favorite books of the last couple of years, 3 years, is Gary Keller's One Thing. And I think to make the one thing is probably the big answer. But I think to do that, you need conviction, clarity, and consistency. So there's going to be a lot of people right now, and I don't say right now really from a perspective of right now where we are in time, wherever we are in time, in 10 years time, there will be a lot of people right now who are listening to this because they want to break out of where they are. And obviously inside of my stuff, I'll talk about longer goals and visions and activities and all that kind of thing. But I think one of the things that I found is really useful is to kind of make a list of all your projects and go, which is the one maybe 90-day project that will move me the most. Decide what that is, and then work out what are the, and if you can get one thing, great, but max 3 things. What is the stuff you need to do? And then put that into your diary and make sure it happens. You know, I mean, we were talking about this the other day. And I think the hardest thing sometimes is working out what that is. And I think often people will neither pick the goal, nor will they. So I think the first problem they'll have is they won't pick the goal, and they won't pick the goal because of a lack of conviction. So they'll have this thing going on that goes, well, if I pick that goal, I can't do that one or that one or that one. And I think the point is you want some movement. Greg Rollett, in one of the interviews that I did back early in the year, said, sometimes you just have to take action and then steer afterwards. And I think if people are really stuck in that thing going, well, I don't know what I want and I don't know where I need to be, I think the key thing is action. So it's going, what is the really one big goal that I want to move out to? What do I need to do to move forward in that? And then using everything you've got to make that stick. So, in the morning, ask yourself, how can I be a 10 today? Have it booked into your diary, whatever it is you need to do. See yourself doing it. So you're having your shower, see yourself doing it, go and do it. And then the evening go, did I do it? What was good about that? What do I learn from that? How do I do it better tomorrow? And then stick at that for your 90 days. But I think one of the key things is assessment in that. So you've got to assess it, haven't you? You're laughing. You love a system.
I was just thinking about how much I need to hear that myself. When I do that, my days go brilliantly. When I don't do that, they're not quite so good. So I'm there smirking myself thinking, this is great advice. I should be taking notes.
But it's everybody, Michael. When we used to, and I don't want to turn people off who weren't in sales, but when we used to do cold calling training, right? You'd get 100 people in a room. And if I could have given them one thing, right? 95% of people in that room didn't need my training. 95% of my training didn't even need my confidence. What they needed to do was make the calls every day. That was what they needed to do. And, we've both had this conversation with CEOs where you say to a CEO, what's the most important thing to you? Well, I need to build a high performance team because they're not great right now. What's one thing you can do to build that high performance team? Oh, what I need to do is, and then they give you an answer. So let's say that answer is, run a weekly leadership meeting with them that's motivational and whatever, and do one-to-one sessions with them starting every week, then dropping off to once a month. And you rock back, a month later, and you go, hey, how's it going? Have you done that? And they go, no. So what have you been doing? Oh, I've been really busy. I did this and this and this and this and this. And you go, hang on a minute. And this is my favorite question, by the way, almost bar none. And I ask this of myself too, because when I look at my three most important things in my life, number one is my kids and my family, right? What is the one thing? There's three things, but what is the one main thing I want to do? And this, sit down for dinner with them on a daily basis. And so my question to myself is, if I don't make that, is what is it that was so important that I didn't do the most important thing in my life?
Brilliant.
And the answer is nothing. And, so you go, well, I did this and you did this. And you go, but which one? Which one was so important that you didn't do the most important thing in your life? And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to doing whatever it is. So if you want to pass an exam and you've got 90 days, then the number one thing is studying. If you want to get super fit, then the number one thing is getting fit. Doesn't mean you can't do other stuff, but it does mean that needs to happen. We talked about this in relation to new business the other day, and it comes down to where do you want to be in 90 days and what is the number one thing you can do? Factor that into your diary, get that done. And then, as you said to me, do one, then layer on two and layer on three. Brilliant. But you've just got to make sure it happens. Interestingly, a lot of sales teams work because the environment is set up so that people have to do what they have to do, i.e. the organization makes sure that they do the most important thing. And then what happens is those salespeople become really successful. They leave and set up their own organizations and they say, what we need is a grown-up environment where everybody just does what they're supposed to do and nobody does what they're supposed to do. And you're like, why? And it's like, because nobody helped them prioritize, nobody helped them understand, nobody helped them, think about it. And ultimately, the behaviors that you display on a daily basis determine where you get to. Yes, I believe that comes from conviction and clarity and consistency. But as let's finish off with my favorite quote, as Batman says, it's not who you are underneath, it's what you do that defines you.
That's brilliant. Gavin, thank you very much indeed for your time and your wisdom and your energy today. Where can people find out about more about you and the work that you do?
Sure, two places. They can go to my website where there's all sorts of stuff, blogs and videos, iam10.com. So that's iam10.com. Likewise, feel free to search out my Facebook group, iam10, strangely enough, or let's give you a third one, or LinkedIn, any of the above. I'm not hard to find.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Gavin. It's been brilliant.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Peak Performance Productivity Podcast. Being a productive peak performer is about developing strong and long-lasting habits. Get your free habit installation kit from 5minutehabitkit.com right now where you'll be able to permanently install any habit you choose in under 5 minutes a day with this proven 3-step system. They are surprisingly easy to install with this free kit once you know how. And if you've got just one thing from today's episode that you can use, then please like, share, subscribe, comment or review to show your appreciation to today's guest. Until next time.